Introduction. Before I begin to tell you what this book is about, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Rossi Eason, and I'm a young African American male, 28 at the time of writing this book, who grew up in Newburgh, New York, about an hour north of the busy Manhattan borough. I grew up in an upper middle class neighborhood, went to a predominantly poor white school, but hung out with mostly poor Black and Hispanic kids in the ghetto, picking up things from each experience. While I grew up middle class, most of my friends were extremely poor. Early on in my preteen years, my father landed an aviation contract with a billionaire, who I will keep nameless, that came with certain benefits. My family has been able to fly around in G5 private jets, vacation at and travel to the finest places while staying in five-star hotels and eating at the finest restaurants. As a young man, my weeks may have consisted of a number of different experiences: relaxing in my house in the suburbs, flying with my father on a G5 plane, sitting on a milk crate between the corner store or the barber shop, drinking a quarter water while I watched the police chase people down the street as I waited on my ride to come. As I mentioned earlier, many of my friends lived in the hood or rougher parts of town, if you know what I mean. So that is where the majority of my actual hangout time was spent. I didn't grow up on the streets, but let's just say I did everything that someone who did grow up in the streets would do. In my mind, I had the best of both worlds. I'd often spend the better part of the summer in the South with my aunt and uncle. We'd spend the majority of our time in church. When I say in church, I mean Ministry Mondays, Testimonial Tuesdays, Witnessing Wednesdays, Thanksgiving Thursdays, and Forgiveness Fridays. Now, on Saturday, we didn't attend church, but we certainly spent the bulk of our day cleaning it up. Sunday was the big day. We'd get dressed up and spend all day at church. Church began with Bible study, then first, second, and third services. You may not think that's a lot, but the first service ended at 12 o'clock. Second service ended at 3 o'clock. And evening service ended at 9 o'clock. Now imagine going back and forth from this extremely sacred environment to my extremely secular life in New York. And to that, a Black college experience and two parents who are originally from the South and were very active in the civil rights movement. And you get a pretty well-rounded individual. It's safe to say that I've experienced just about every aspect of the economic and racial totem pole. So yes, humbly, I say that the experiences I have had allow me to see both the lowest and highest places in life and have given me the opportunity to see the world from a different view. Most people, regardless of race, usually spend most of their lives in one racial, economic, or demographic divide, and consequently, usually only see things from that perspective. In other words, they can only see the trees. They can't see the forest. I've been fortunate enough to have experiences that afforded me the opportunity to become a well-rounded individual and to see things holistically and in totality. This has given me a reference point that allows me to compare and contrast different life situations. I hope my perspective and experiences will help you see the information in this book beyond the normal view. The idea for this book came about after a friend of mine introduced me to a document called the Willie Lynch letter, The Making of a Slave. This letter is the transcript of a speech given in Virginia by Willie Lynch, a slave master and plantation owner, on how to create and control slaves. After reading this letter, it became apparent to me why we as African Americans have so many issues within our culture. I've always known that slavery was the root of a lot of African American issues, but after reading this document and learning of all the Willie Lynchisms, the idea became solidified in my mind. Although slavery happened long ago, it is what shaped the fabric of African American culture. After reading the Willie Lynch letter, I understood exactly why and how it happened and how deeply rooted and diabolical these issues really are. My thinking after reading this is, If the plan was to destroy the African American people, what if we reverse engineered everything in this plan? Could we reverse the process entirely? According to the documentation, this letter was written in 1712. It was said that if this plan was executed properly, it would last for at least 300 years, unless a phenomenon occurred. The year 2012 marked the 300th year since the writing of this book. Because 2013 is the first year after this 300-year mark, I thought this would be the perfect time to bring forth a plan such as mine during the first year after this Willie Lynchism should have run its course. This is that phenomenon. Before I talk about what this book is, I first want to talk about what this book is not. This is not an obscure form of racism or another kill whitey movement or a rise up against your oppressor argument or anything of that nature. Nor is this book another excuse for why Black people can't be successful or how our life is so much harder than everyone else's or any kind of reasoning for us not being where we need to be as a people. As a matter of fact, this book has less to do with racism and more to do with the perpetual destruction that we have placed upon ourselves. Generations and generations of perpetual bad thinking and concepts have created the invisible prison that we have been placed in and continue to place ourselves in today. If this book is about anything, it is about taking personal responsibility for ourselves. Now, the hard truth is that slavery is what shaped African American culture, and this has created a lot of dysfunctional behaviors among Black people that has been and continues to be interwoven into the fabric of our culture. For your reference throughout the reading of this book, the Willie Lynch letter is included. There is much controversy surrounding the authenticity of this letter. The truth is, it doesn't matter if it's real or not. The fact is that these controlling concepts were used on African Americans during slavery in one form or the other, and you can still see the effects of them today. Following the Willie Lynch letter, I will begin to break down the reverse engineering process and the 6 pillars of African American society that will make this process possible. This is not just about offering information for our people, but also about introducing the Restore Black America Foundation, which will be providing the tools for each individual in the African American community to make a change. www.restoreblackamerica.org. If this plan is implemented by each individual, I believe that, thanks to technology and the ability to spread messages easily and quickly, the effects of Willie Lynchism can be undone in 1/3 of the time it took to create it. This means that in the next 100 years, we can reverse the destructive process that has plagued our community with noticeable results every 10 years. Too often we have talks, forums, symposiums, and seminars on these subjects that plague our community, but you will find that there are seldom any changes made. This is because the only way to bridge the gap from transformation to implementation is with tools, templates, and blueprints. This book is more than just a book, but rather an action plan for restoring Black America economically, culturally, politically, ideologically, and spiritually. Warning: some of the language in the letter is harsh and vulgar. Reader discretion is advised.
Gentlemen, I greet you here on the bank of the James River in the year of our Lord 1712. First, I shall thank you, the gentlemen of the colony of Virginia, for bringing me here. I am here to help you solve some of your problems with slaves. Your invitation reached me on my modest plantation in the West Indies, where I have experimented with some of the newest and still the oldest methods for control of slaves. Ancient Rome's would envy us if my program is implemented. As our boat sailed south on the James River, named for our illustrious king, whose version of the Bible we cherish, I saw enough to know that your problem is not unique. While Rome used cords of wood as crosses for standing human bodies along its highways in great numbers, you are here using the tree and the rope on occasions. I caught the whiff of a dead slave hanging from a tree a couple miles back. You are not only losing valuable stock by hangings, you are having uprisings, and slaves are running away Your crops are sometimes left in the fields too long for maximum profit. You suffer occasional fires, and your animals are killed. Gentlemen, you know what your problems are. I do not need to elaborate. I am not here to enumerate your problems. I am here to introduce you to a method of solving them. In a bag here, I have a foolproof method for controlling your black slaves. I guarantee every one of you that if installed correctly, it will control the slaves for at least 300 years. My method is simple. Any member of your family or your overseer can use it. I have outlined a number of differences among the slaves and make the differences bigger. I use fear, distrust, and envy for control. These methods have worked on my modest plantation in the West Indies, and it will work throughout the South. Take this simple list of differences and think about them. On top of my list is age, but it's there only because it starts with an A. The second is color or shade. Then there's intelligence, size, sex, size of plantations and status of plantations, attitude of owners, whether the slaves live in the valley, on a hill, east, west, north, south, have fine hair, coarse hair, or is tall or short. Now that you have a list of differences, I shall give you an outline of action. But before that, I shall assure you that distrust is stronger than trust, and envy stronger than adulation, respect, or admiration. The black slaves, after receiving this indoctrination, shall carry on and will become self-refueling and self-regenerating for hundreds of years, maybe thousands. Don't forget, you must pitch the old black male versus the young black male, and the young black male versus the old black male. You must use the dark-skinned slaves versus the light-skinned slaves, and the light-skinned slaves versus the dark-skinned slaves. You must use the female versus the male, and the male versus the female. You must also have your own white servants and overseers distrust all blacks. On the contrary, it is necessary that our slaves trust and depend on us. They must love, respect, and trust only us. Gentlemen, these kits are your eyes to control. Use them. Have your wives and children use them. Never miss an opportunity. If used intensely for 1 year, the slaves themselves will remain perpetually distrustful of each other. Thank you, gentlemen. Let's make a slave! It was the interest and business of slaveholders to study human nature, and the slave nature in particular, with a view to practical results. I and many of them attained astonishing proficiency in this direction. They had to deal not with earth, wood, and stone, but with men, and by every regard they had for their own safety and prosperity. They needed to know the material on which they were to work. Conscious of the injustice and wrong, they were every hour perpetuating and knowing what they themselves would do. Were they the victims of such wrongs? They were constantly looking for the first signs of the dreaded retribution. They watched, therefore, with skilled and practiced eyes, and learned to read with great accuracy the state of mind and heart of the slave through his sable face. Unusual sobriety, apparent abstraction, sullenness, and indifference indeed, any mood out of the common, was afforded ground for suspicion and inquiry. Let us make a slave. What do we need? First of all, we need a black nigger man, a pregnant nigger woman, and her baby nigger boy. Second, we will use the same basic principle that we use in breaking a horse, combined with some more sustaining factors. What we do with horses is that we break them from one form of life to another. That is, we reduce them from their natural state in nature. whereas nature provides them with the natural capacity to care of their offspring. We break that natural string of independence from them and thereby create a dependency on us, so that we may be able to get from them useful production for our business and pleasure. For fear that our future generations may not understand the principles of breaking both of the beasts together, the nigger and the horse, we understand that short-range planning economics results in periodic economic chaos. So that to avoid turmoil in the economy, it requires us to have both breadth and depth in long-range comprehensive planning, articulating both skill-sharp perceptions. We lay down the following principles for long-range comprehensive economic planning. Both horses and niggers are no good to the economy in the wild or natural state. Both must be broken and tied together for orderly production. For orderly future, special and particular attention must be paid to the female and the youngest offspring. Both must be crossbred to produce a variety and division of labor. Both must be taught to respond to a peculiar new language. Psychological and physical instruction of containment must be created for both. We hold the 6 cardinal principles as truth to be self-evident. Based upon the following, the discourse concerning the economics of breaking and tying the horse and the nigger together, all inclusive of the 6 principles laid down about. Note, neither principle alone will suffice for good economics. All principles must be employed for orderly good of the nation. Accordingly, both a wild horse and a wild or nature nigger is dangerous even if captured, for they will have the tendency to seek their customary freedom, and in doing so, might kill you in your sleep. You cannot rest. They sleep while you are awake, and are awake while you are asleep. They are dangerous near the family house, and it requires too much labor to watch them away from the house. Above all, you cannot get them to work in this natural state. Hence, both the horse and the nigger must be broken. That is breaking them from one form of mental life to another. Keep the body, take the mind. In other words, break the will to resist. Now, the breaking process is the same for both the horse and the nigger, only slightly varying in degrees. But, as we said before, there is an art in long-range economic planning. You must keep your eye and thoughts on the female and the offspring of the horse and the nigger. A brief discourse is offspring development will shed light on the key to sound economic principles. Pay attention to the generation of original breaking, but concentrate on future generations. Therefore, if you break the female mother, she shall break the offspring in its early years of development, and when the offspring is old enough to work, she will deliver it up to you, for her normal female protective tendencies will have been lost in the original breaking process. For her normal female protective tendencies will have been lost in the original breaking process. For example, take the case of the wild stud horse, a female horse and an already infant horse, and compare the breaking process with 2 captured nigger males in their natural state, and a pregnant nigger woman with her infant offspring. Take the stud horse. Break him for limited containment. Completely break the female horse until she becomes very gentle, whereas you or anybody can ride her in her comfort. Breed the mare and the stud until you have the desired offspring. Then you can turn the stud to freedom until you need him again. Train the female horse whereby she will eat out of your hand, and she will in turn train the infant horse to eat out of your hand also. When it comes to breaking the uncivilized nigger, use the same process, but vary the degree and step up the pressure, so as to do a complete reversal of the mind. Take the meanest and most relentless nigger Strip him of his clothes in front of the remaining male nigger, the female, and the nigger infant. Tar and feather him. Tie each leg to a different horse faced in opposite directions. Set him afire and beat both horses to pull him apart in front of the remaining nigger. The next step is to take a bullwhip and beat the remaining nigger male to the point of death in front of the female and the infant. Don't kill him, but put the fear of God in him, for he can be useful in the future breeding. The process of breaking the African woman. Take the female and run a series of tests on her to see if she will submit to your desires willingly. Test her in every way, because she is the most important factor for good economics. If she shows any sign of resistance in submitting completely to your will, do not hesitate to use the bullwhip on her to extract that last bit of resistance out of her. Take care not to kill her, for in doing so, you spoil good economics. When in complete submission, she will train her offsprings in the early years to submit to the labor when they become of age. Understanding is the best thing. Therefore, we shall go deeper into the area of the subject matter concerning what we have produced here in this breaking process of the female nigger. We have reversed the relationship. In her natural uncivilized state, she would have a strong dependency on the uncivilized nigger male, and she would have a limited protective tendency towards her independent male offspring and would raise female offsprings to be dependent, like her. Nature had provided for this type of balance. We have reversed nature by burning and pulling a civilized nigger apart and bullwhipping the other to the point of death, all in her presence. By her being left alone, unprotected, with the male image destroyed, the ordeal caused her to move from the psychological dependent state to a frozen independent state. In this frozen psychological state of independence, she will raise her male and female offspring in reversed roles. For fear of the young male's life, she will psychologically train him to be mentally weak and dependent, but physically strong. Because she has become psychologically independent, what have you got? You've got the nigger woman out front and the nigger man behind and scared. This is a perfect situation of sound sleep and good economics. Before the breaking process, we had to be alertly on guard at all times. Now, we can sleep soundly, for out of frozen fear his woman stands guard for us. He cannot get past her early slave molding process. He is a good tool, now ready to be tied to the horse at a tender age. By the time a nigger boy reaches the age of 16, he is soundly broken and ready for a long life of sound and efficient work and the reproduction of a unit of good labor force. Continually through the breaking of uncivilized savage nigger, by throwing the nigger female savage into a frozen psychological state of independence, by killing of the protective male image, and by creating a submissive dependent mind of the nigger male slave, we have created an orbiting cycle that turns on its own axis forever, unless a phenomenon occurs and reshifts the position of the male and female slaves. We show what we mean by example. Take the case of the two economic slave units and examine them closely. The nigger marriage. We breed two nigger males with two nigger females. Then we take the nigger males away from them and keep them moving and working. So one nigger female bears a nigger female and the other bears a nigger male. Both nigger females being without influence of the nigger male image, frozen with an independent psychology, will raise their offspring into reverse positions. The one with the female offspring will teach her to be like herself, independent and negotiable. We negotiate with her, through her, by her. We negotiate her at will. The one with the nigger male offspring, she being frozen with a subconscious fear for his life, will raise him to be mentally dependent and weak, but physically strong. In other words, body over mind. Now, in a few years, when these two offsprings become fertile for early reproduction, we will mate and breed them and continue the cycle. That is good, sound, and long-range comprehensive planning. Warning: possible interloping negatives. Earlier we talked about the non-economic good of the horse and the nigger in the wild or natural state. We talked out the principle of breaking and tying them together for orderly production. Furthermore, we talked about paying particular attention to the female savage and her offspring for orderly future planning. Then more recently, we stated that by reversing the positions of the male and the female savages, we created an orbiting cycle that turns on its own axis forever, unless a phenomenon occurs and reshifts and positions of the male and female savages. Our experts warned us about the possibility of this phenomenon occurring, for they say that the mind has a strong drive to correct and recorrect itself over a period of time. If I can touch some substantial original historical base, and they advised us that the best way to deal with the phenomenon is to shave off the brute's mental history and create a multiplicity of phenomena of illusion, so that each illusion will twirl in its own orbit, something similar to floating balls in a vacuum. This creation of multiplicity of phenomenon of illusions entails the principle of crossbreeding the nigger and the horse, as we stated above. The purpose of this is to create a diversified division of labor with different values of illusion at each connecting level of labor, the results of which is the severance of the points of the original beginnings for each spear illusion. Since we feel that the subject matter may get more complicated as we proceed in laying down our economic plan concerning the purpose, reason, and effect of crossbreeding horses and niggers, we shall lay down the following definition terms for future generations. Orbiting cycle means a thing turning in a given path. Axis means upon which or around which a body turns. Phenomenon means something beyond ordinary conception and inspires awe and wonder. Multiplicity means a great number. Crossbreeding a horse means taking a horse and breeding it with an ass, and you get a numb backward-ass long-headed mule that is not reproductive or productive by itself. Crossbreeding niggers means taking so many drops of good white blood and putting them into as many nigger women as possible, varying the drops by the various tones that you want, and then letting them breed with each other until another cycle of color appears as you desire. What this means is this: put the niggers and the horses in a breeding pot, mix some asses and some good white blood, and what do you get? You get a multiplicity of colors as ass backward, unusual niggers, running, tied to a backward ass long-headed mule, the one productive of itself, the other sterile. The one constant, the other dying. We keep the nigger constant, for we may replace the mules for another tool, both mule and nigger tied to each other, neither knowing where the other came from, and neither productive for itself, nor without each other. Control the language. Crossbreeding complete. For further severance from their original beginning, we must completely annihilate the mother tongue of both the new nigger and the new mule and institute a new language that involves the new life's work of both. We know language is a peculiar institution. It leads to the heart of people. The more a foreigner knows about the language of another country, the more he is able to move through all levels of that society. Therefore, if the foreigner is an enemy of the country, to the extent that he knows the body of the language, to that extent is the country vulnerable to attack or invasion of foreign culture. For example, if you take a slave, if you teach him all about your language, he will know all your secrets, and he is then no more a slave, for you can't fool him any longer. For example, if you told a slave he must perform in getting out our crops, and he knows the language well, he would know that our crops didn't mean our crops, and the slavery system would break down. For he would relate on the basis of what our crops really mean. So, you have to be careful in setting up the new language, for the slaves would soon be in your house, talking to you man to man, and that is death to our economic system. In addition, the definition of words or terms are only a minute part of the process. Values are created and transported by communication through the body of the language. A total society has many interconnected value systems. All of the values of society have bridges of language to connect them for orderly working in the society. But for these language bridges, these many value systems would sharply clash and cause internal strife or civil war, the degree of the conflict being determined by the magnitude of the issues or relative opposing strength in whatever form. For example, if you put a slave in a hog pen and train him to live there and incorporate in him to value it as a way of life completely, the biggest problem you will have out of him is that he will worry you about provisions to keep the hog pen clean, or the same hog pen and make a slip and incorporate something in his language whereby he comes to value a house more than he does his hog pen. You got a problem. He will soon be in your house.
Again, the purpose of this book and the purpose of introducing the Willie Lynch letter is not to ignite a race war, blame the white man, or cause disdain towards white people or any other race. It is more so done to give you a clear picture of how slavery has shaped our culture, molded the people we are, and created many of the problems that we have today. Since this letter so clearly outlined a plan to destroy the African American mind, I thought it would serve as a great catalyst or blueprint to begin the reverse engineering process. The problems we face as African Americans are multifaceted and will require a multifaceted approach to fixing them. The Restore Black America blueprint has been broken down into 6 major components or pillars: culture, economics, politics, health, family, and spirituality. Each one of these pillars is a major player in the restoration process, and they are all connected. Think of it like building or rebuilding a house. If the foundation of the house rests on several pillars, and one of those pillars is missing a portion of it, the foundation will be built or rebuilt unevenly, causing problems in other parts of the house as well. In the first chapter, we will look at the pillar that sets the framework for all others: culture.